Okay, hello, environmental science. Today we are talking about the nitrogen cycle. So the goal of the nitrogen cycle is just continue our exploration of nutrient cycling, and I want you guys to be able to describe the interconnectedness of Earth's cycles. So how all of the cycles we have or will talk about, carbon, phosphorus, and water cycles kind of interact with one another and how they and where they take place in all of the Earth's spheres. So to start us off, we've got some key ideas and some terms that I want you to be able to know before we talk about the actual carbon cycle. First, if you remember from our talk about the atmosphere, about 78% of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, and nitrogen is the sixth most abundant element on Earth. The process of nitrogen fixation is just nitrogen gas being converted into ammonia. So most organisms can't use nitrogen gas as a nitrogen source. It has to be put into ammonia, which is NH4, and that ammonia can be used by organisms, but the nitrogen gas cannot. So nitrogen fixation is just being able to is just the process of converting nitrogen gas into ammonia. So the next process we're going to talk about is nitrification and denitrification. Essentially, bacteria in the soil can use ammonium ions from nitrogen fixation or waste from decomposers and convert them into nitrate ions. So getting from ammonium to nitrate. And denitrification is when nitrates go back to being gas. So nitrates are how nitrogen is stored in soil, and bacteria can take the ammonium, which is used by, or which is another form of ammonia. So ammonium ions from nitrogen fixation or decomposers wastes can convert them into nitrate ions and be stored in the soil. And denitrification is when those nitrates go back to being gas. So this is our nitrogen cycle. It is relatively simple compared to our phosphorus and carbon cycles, but I still want you to have a copy of this in your notes. It doesn't have to be this doodled, but just the arrows and the words will work. So if we start up at the top with nitrogen in the atmosphere, this nitrogen in the atmosphere is stored as N2. And that N2, like we said, needed to be fixed in order for plants to use it. So nitrogen fixing bacteria exist in the earth and on plants' roots. So this bacteria takes the N2 out of the air, turns it into ammonia, and those ammonia can be used by the plants. Same thing here, the nitrogen fixing bacteria fix it to ammonium. Ammonium is taken into or is goes through the process of nitrification into nitrites and eventually into nitrates, like we said. So nitrification, it just goes from ammonium to nitrates, and those nitrates can either be denitrified into the atmosphere or assimilated into plants. So plants can get nitrogen from the nitrates in the soil or from the ammonium in the soil. So the nitrates get taken up into plants, and those plants get eaten by our little muskrat looking thing over here. And when it dies or when it defecates, whatever nitrogen is left can be decomposed, and that decomposition creates more ammonium, which then is nitrified into nitrates and either taken back up into plants or released into the atmosphere. And that just kind of keeps going and going and going because, like we said, in elements can neither be created or destroyed. So all of the nitrogen that exists, and it cannot be created or destroyed. So it goes through this cycle over and over and over again, just kind of changing forms. So the human beings do have an impact on the nitrogen cycle. So right before World War One, humans learned how to fix nitrogen. So before, the only thing that could fix nitrogen were like the for organisms that knew how to do it. So the nitrogen fixing bacteria, but we were able to learn how to fix it ourselves in the lab. So we increased the flow out of the atmosphere. We were able to take that nitrogen out of the atmosphere and use it for things like fertilizer. So we were able to take nitrogen out of the air and use it for fertilizer and increase the amount of nitrogen that was coming out of the atmosphere. By burning forests and fields and fossil fuels, we are also impacting the nitrogen cycle by releasing some into the air, or also by creating increased amounts in soils as opposed to trees. We also, by burning forests and fields, don't have plants to hold that nitrogen anymore. But policy has been put in place in the past to help to protect the environment from people. So the amount of fertilizers and the amount of nitrogen in those fertilizers that are allowed to be used have changed over the years, as well as the amount of forests and fields that can be burned and why they are burned. So this is essentially the entirety of the nitrogen cycle. Be thinking about how the nitrogen cycle and the carbon cycle and the phosphorus cycle and the water cycle all kind of interplay with one another. And make sure you answer the questions in the assignment and submit your notes. Other than that, I have nothing else for you. Have a wonderful day.